They laughed at him. They called him a troublemaker. But what happened next left everyone speechless. It's a story that changed how I see courage in the most unexpected places. Before I continue, if stories like this inspire you, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss the next ones. My name is Michael and I've been teaching at Lincoln Elementary School for over 15 years. But nothing prepared me for what I witnessed last spring in our small town of Oak Ridge, Minnesota. You know those moments that seem ordinary until they become extraordinary? This was one of them. Tommy Jenkins was just 10 years old, small for his age, with unruly brown hair that never seemed to stay in place, and clothes that had clearly been passed down too many times. In our school, where many parents worked at the local tech companies and dressed their kids in the latest brands, Tommy stood out. Not because he wanted to, quite the opposite. He tried his best to blend in, to be invisible. The classroom smelled of chalk dust and hand sanitizer that morning. Outside, the early spring sun was finally breaking through after months of gray skies. While other kids were showing off their new sneakers or talking about their weekend trips to the mall, Tommy was quietly organizing his worn-out school supplies: a stubby pencil, a half-used eraser, and a notebook with dog-eared pages. I noticed how carefully he handled each item, as if they were precious treasures. There was something about that boy's quiet dignity that always caught my attention. In a world where everyone wants to be seen, Tommy just wanted to do his part without drawing attention. But that simple routine was about to become the headline of our local newspaper, and eventually go viral across social media platforms nationwide. It all started with Lucas Parker, the new student who had joined us a month ago. Lucas was different too, but in another way. He had a severe stutter that made speaking in class an ordeal for him. Each time I called on Lucas, the classroom would tense up as he struggled to push the words out. Some kids would look away uncomfortably, others would giggle behind their hands. But Tommy? He would just wait patiently, his eyes fixed on Lucas, nodding encouragingly. That day, I had asked the class to present their science projects. When it was Lucas's turn, he walked to the front, clutching his project, a detailed solar system model that was clearly made with care and precision. He began to explain his work, but the stutter was particularly bad that day. The solar system has 8 planets. I could see sweat forming on his forehead as he struggled. A few snickers erupted from the back of the class. I shot a warning glance in that direction, but the damage was done. Lucas's face turned crimson, and tears welled in his eyes. That's when I noticed Tommy straightening in his seat, his expression changing from quiet observation to something more determined. But before I could intervene, the classroom door opened, and the principal walked in with 2 visitors, Lucas's parents, who had come to see the presentations. What happened next created a tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Lucas tried even harder to speak clearly with his parents now watching, but the stutter only worsened. The Earth rotates on its AA axis once every 24 hours. From the back of the room, I heard someone mimic the stutter. Looking over, I saw it was Dylan, one of our more popular students. And then, to my shock and disappointment, I heard a soft chuckle from Mr. Parker himself. Lucas's own father was smirking at his son's struggle, nudging his wife as if to say, "See what I mean?" The room fell silent. Lucas saw his father's reaction, and the look on that child's face is something I'll never forget. Pure heartbreak mixed with humiliation. He stopped mid-sentence, his small shoulders slumping in defeat. I was about to step forward when Tommy's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood up. Every head turned his way. Tommy, who barely spoke above a whisper most days, was now standing straight, his hands balled into tight fists at his sides. But what nobody expected was what he would do next. "Stop it," Tommy said, his voice surprisingly clear and steady. "Just stop it right now." The room went completely still. Tommy wasn't looking at the kids who had laughed. He was looking directly at Mr. Parker. "He's your son," Tommy continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. "And he made this amazing project that probably took him days to finish. He knows everything about the planets and stars. I've heard him talk about it during lunch. He doesn't stutter as much when he's not scared or nervous." Mr. Parker's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of surprise, then embarrassment. "But right now he's scared, and you're making it worse. You're supposed to be on his side." I held my breath. In 15 years of teaching, I'd never seen a student stand up to an adult like this. especially not a student like Tommy, who seemed to do everything possible to avoid attention. Mr. Parker's face flushed red. "Young man, you have no right to speak to me that way. You don't understand." "I understand that Lucas is really smart and works really hard," Tommy interrupted, something I'd never seen him do before. "And I understand that laughing at someone who's trying their best is wrong. My mom says that's called bullying." The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Parker placed a hand on her husband's arm, her expression a mixture of shock and shame. Lucas was staring at Tommy with wide eyes, as if seeing him for the first time. If this had been a movie, the class would have erupted into applause. But real life isn't like that. Instead, there was an uncomfortable shifting of weight, averted gazes, and the principal stepping forward to defuse the situation. "Tommy, please take your seat," she said firmly. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker, perhaps we should continue this discussion in my office." As the adults left the room, I asked the class to take out their textbooks and read quietly. Lucas remained at the front, frozen, his project forgotten in his hands. Tommy got up, walked to the front of the class, and helped Lucas carry his solar system model back to his desk. I heard him whisper, "It's really cool how you got the rings around Saturn to stand out like that." The rest of the day passed in a blur. The principal called Tommy to her office, and later his mother was called in as well. I worried that Tommy would be punished for speaking disrespectfully to an adult, regardless of how justified his words had been. When the final bell rang, I found Tommy sitting alone on the steps outside the school, waiting for his mom to pick him up. I sat down beside him. "That was a brave thing you did today, Tommy," I said. He shrugged, staring at his worn-out sneakers. "I just said what was true. Sometimes that's the bravest thing of all," I told him, "especially when everyone else is staying quiet." He looked up at me then, his eyes wiser than his years. "My mom works 2 jobs and we don't have much money. Kids used to make fun of me at my old school. No one helped me then. I just didn't want Lucas to feel alone like that." His words hit me hard. How often had I seen injustice, small or large, and stayed quiet because it was easier? How many times had I chosen comfort over courage? Just then, a beat-up old sedan pulled up, and Tommy stood to leave. "Will I get in trouble?" he asked, suddenly looking like the 10-year-old boy he was. "I don't think so," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. "What you did came from a good place, Tommy." He nodded and ran to his mother's car. I watched them drive away, wondering what would happen next. I had no idea that this small moment of courage would soon ripple far beyond our little school. The next morning, I arrived early to find the principal waiting for me. "We need to talk about yesterday," she said, her expression unreadable. My heart sank. I prepared to defend Tommy, to argue that his behavior, while unconventional, came from a place of kindness and courage. "Mr. Parker called me last night," she continued as we walked to her office. "He was very upset." Of course he was. A 10-year-old had called him out for bullying his own son. I braced myself for what was coming next. "He apologized," she said, surprising me. "Said the boy was right, that he's been frustrated with Lucas's stutter for years and hasn't handled it well. He and his wife had a long talk last night. They're looking into better speech therapy options for Lucas, and Mr. Parker is going to join a parent support group." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "All because of what Tommy said?" The principal nodded. "Sometimes it takes a child's honesty to make adults face uncomfortable truths." She handed me a note. "Mr. Parker asked me to give this to Tommy. It's an apology." When Tommy arrived that morning, I gave him the note privately. His eyes widened as he read it, and a small, proud smile spread across his face. The first real smile I'd seen from him all year. But that was only the beginning. During lunch, I noticed Tommy and Lucas sitting together, heads bent over a book about astronomy. Lucas was talking, still stuttering, but less severely, and Tommy was listening intently, asking questions that kept the conversation flowing. By the end of the week, something had shifted in our classroom. The students who used to ignore or tease Lucas started including him. I'd like to say it was because they all had a sudden moral awakening, but the truth was simpler. Tommy had made it cool to be kind. By standing up for Lucas, he'd shown a different kind of courage than what these kids usually admired in their sports heroes or movie stars. I thought the story would end there, a small victory in our little corner of the world. I was wrong. The following Monday, a local parent who volunteered at the school and had heard about the incident posted about it on social media. She didn't use any names, just described how a boy from a struggling family had stood up to an adult to defend another child. The post struck a chord. People started sharing it, adding comments about times they wished they'd spoken up but didn't have the courage. By Wednesday, a local news station had picked up the story and wanted to interview the boy who'd spoken truth to power. Tommy's mother was hesitant. They weren't the type of family that sought attention, but after talking with Tommy, she agreed, on the condition that they focus on the message rather than making Tommy into some kind of hero. The interview was scheduled for Friday afternoon. I watched as the news crew set up in our classroom after the other students had gone home. Tommy sat at his desk, looking smaller than usual next to the camera equipment and lights. "Just be yourself," I told him before the interview began. "Just tell the truth, like you did that day." He nodded, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his desk. The reporter, a kind-faced woman who seemed to understand Tommy's nervousness, started with easy questions. What grade was he in? Did he like science class? Then she asked him about what had happened with Lucas. Tommy spoke quietly at first, then with growing confidence. "Lucas is really smart," he said. "He knows a lot about space and planets. He just has trouble getting the words out sometimes. But that doesn't mean people should laugh at him or make him feel bad." "And what made you decide to speak up that day?" the reporter asked. Tommy was quiet for a moment, thinking. "My mom always says that being poor doesn't mean you can't be rich in character. We don't have a lot of money or nice things, but she taught me that how you treat people is what really matters." I glanced at Tommy's mother, who was watching from the side of the room, tears streaming silently down her face. "Were you scared to stand up to an adult?" the reporter continued. Tommy nodded. "Yeah, I was scared, but I was more scared of what would happen if nobody said anything. Lucas looked so sad. I know how that feels." The reporter's next question surprised me. "Some people might say you were disrespectful to speak to an adult that way. What would you say to them?" Tommy considered this carefully. I think respect is important. My mom taught me that too. But respect doesn't mean you should stay quiet when someone's being hurt, even if that person is an adult. I think the most respectful thing is to tell the truth, out of the mouths of babes," I thought. The interview aired on the local news that weekend. By Monday, it had been picked up by national outlets. Clips of Tommy's earnest answers were being shared across social media platforms, with hashtags like "Courage of Children" and "Speaking Truth" trending. Our small-town story had touched something in the national consciousness, perhaps a hunger for simple moral clarity in complicated times, or a reminder that courage can come in the smallest packages. The school began receiving letters and emails from across the country. People sent school supplies for our classroom, books for our library, and even scholarship offers for both Tommy and Lucas. A children's book author reached out about writing a story based on what had happened. It was overwhelming, especially for Tommy, who had never sought the spotlight. But through it all, he remained the same thoughtful, quiet boy, except now he had a best friend in Lucas, and a newfound confidence that showed in subtle ways. His posture a little straighter, his hand occasionally raised in class to answer a question. The most meaningful response came from other children. We received hundreds of letters from kids sharing their own stories of being bullied or witnessing bullying, many saying that Tommy had inspired them to speak up. Teachers wrote about using Tommy's story in their classrooms to talk about courage and kindness. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the incident, I found Tommy reading some of these letters during recess, instead of going outside to play. "What do you think about all this?" I asked him, gesturing to the pile of envelopes. He looked up, his expression serious. "I didn't do anything special, Mr. Michael. I just didn't want Lucas to feel alone." "Feeling alone is the worst thing in the world," Tommy added after a moment, his voice barely above a whisper. There was something in his eyes then, a shadow of old pain that no child should have to carry. If this story has moved you so far, please hit like and subscribe to the channel because there are other real and emotional stories that you won't want to miss. The media frenzy continued to grow. What had started as a local human interest story was now being discussed on national morning shows. Child psychologists weighed in on the importance of empathy education. Celebrities shared the story with their millions of followers. And through it all, Tommy just kept coming to school, sitting quietly at his desk and doing his work. One morning, I arrived to find a sleek black car parked outside the school, far nicer than anything usually seen in our school parking lot. A woman in a perfectly tailored business suit was waiting in the principal's office. She introduced herself as Catherine Reynolds, the CEO of a major children's education foundation. "I'd like to speak with the boy and his mother," she said. Her voice was warm but carried the unmistakable authority of someone used to getting what they wanted. "We're interested in featuring his story in our national anti-bullying campaign." The principal glanced at me, and I could read the concern in her eyes that matched my own. Tommy had already been through so much attention, but this could also be a tremendous opportunity. Tommy's mother was called. She arrived looking exhausted, having come directly from her night shift job. The contrast between her worn appearance and Catherine's polished exterior was stark, but Tommy's mom carried herself with quiet dignity that reminded me so much of her son. The meeting was set for after school. Throughout the day, I caught Tommy looking anxious, picking at the edge of his desk, a habit he fell into when nervous. During lunch break, I sat next to him. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to," I told him. "No one would blame you for wanting things to go back to normal." He nodded, poking at his cafeteria food without eating it. "Mom says it could help other kids, though." "That's true, but your mom also wants you to be comfortable." Tommy looked across the cafeteria to where Lucas sat with a few other students. In the weeks since the incident, Lucas had been slowly coming out of his shell. His stutter was still there, but he seemed less paralyzed by it now that he wasn't facing constant ridicule. "I'll do it," Tommy said finally. "But I don't want to be on TV anymore. It makes me feel weird." I relayed his condition to the principal, who passed it along to Ms. Reynolds. To her credit, the CEO agreed immediately. No television, no additional interviews. Just a campaign that would share Tommy's story in schools across the country, focusing on the message rather than the messenger. After school, they met in the library. Tommy, his mother, Ms. Reynolds, the principal, and me. Tommy sat close to his mother, his small hand occasionally reaching for hers when the conversation became too overwhelming. "What you did took extraordinary courage," Ms. Reynolds told him. "But what's even more extraordinary is the ripple effect it's had." She opened her laptop and showed us emails and messages from children and parents nationwide who had been touched by Tommy's story. There were even reports of similar incidents, students standing up against bullying in their own schools, citing Tommy as their inspiration. "We'd like to create an educational program around your story," Ms. Reynolds explained. "We'll change names and details to protect your privacy, but the essence will remain. We'll develop materials that teachers can use to talk about empathy, courage, and standing up for others." Tommy listened quietly, his expression serious beyond his years. "Would that be okay with you?" Ms. Reynolds asked him directly. Tommy looked up at his mother, then at me, then back to Ms. Reynolds. "Will it help other kids like Lucas?" "I believe it will," she replied. "Then it's okay," he said simply. Ms. Reynolds smiled, clearly touched by his sincerity. "Thank you, Tommy, and there's one more thing." She turned to Tommy's mother. "Our foundation would like to offer Tommy a full scholarship fund for his future education, college, or whatever path he chooses to take." Tommy's mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. For a woman who worked 2 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads, the prospect of college for her son had probably seemed an impossible dream. "We don't need charity," she began, but Ms. Reynolds interrupted gently. "It's not charity. It's an investment in a young man who has already demonstrated the kind of character and leadership we desperately need in this world." The meeting ended with paperwork and details that Tommy quickly lost interest in. As the adults talked, he wandered over to the library shelves and pulled out a book about space. Lucas's influence, no doubt. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, I sat alone in my classroom thinking about the day's events. The cynic in me wondered if the foundation was just using Tommy's story for good publicity. But then I remembered the genuine emotion in Ms. Reynolds' eyes when she spoke to him, and I chose to believe in the good intentions behind the offer. The following week brought an unexpected visitor to our classroom, Mr. Parker, Lucas's father. He had requested a brief moment to address the class. I was wary but agreed after consulting with the principal. Mr. Parker stood awkwardly at the front of the room, his confident executive demeanor replaced by genuine humility. "I owe all of you an apology," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Especially you, Lucas." He turned to his son, who stared back wide-eyed. "And you, Tommy." The classroom was silent, every child sensing the importance of the moment. "I was wrong," Mr. Parker continued. "I was wrong to laugh, wrong to be embarrassed by my son's stutter. and wrong to care more about appearances than feelings. It took a 10-year-old boy to show me what real courage looks like. He looked directly at Tommy then. "Thank you for having the bravery to stand up for my son when I failed to do so myself. You've taught me a lesson I won't forget." Tommy's face flushed red with embarrassment, but there was also a flicker of pride in his eyes. After Mr. Parker left, the classroom buzzed with excited whispers. It wasn't every day they witnessed an adult admitting they were wrong. I let them talk, understanding that they were processing an important moment in their young lives. As the semester progressed, the story began to fade from the headlines. New viral sensations took its place. The film crews stopped calling. Life at Lincoln Elementary slowly returned to normal, or rather, a new normal. Lucas and Tommy remained inseparable friends. Lucas's stutter showed remarkable improvement, thanks partly to the new speech therapist his parents had found, but mostly due to the confidence he'd gained from having a true friend. Tommy stayed the same quiet, thoughtful boy, but now other students looked at him differently, with respect that bordered on awe. The anti-bullying campaign was launched that fall. As promised, names and specific details were changed, but the heart of the story remained. Schools across the country began implementing the program, teaching children about empathy and moral courage through Tommy and Lucas's experience. One rainy afternoon in October, about 6 months after the incident, I kept Tommy after class to show him some of the letters we'd received from other schools using the program. "This one's from a girl in Arizona," I told him, holding up a crayon drawing. "She says she made a new friend, who everyone ignored because he's different. And here's one from a boy in Maine who stood up to some kids who were making fun of his sister." Tommy studied the pictures and letters with solemn attention. "Good," was all he said, but I could tell he was deeply moved. "Are you okay with all of this still?" I asked him. "It's a lot for anyone, especially someone your age." He thought for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm okay," he said finally, "but sometimes I worry about later." "What do you mean? What if I do something wrong someday? Everyone thinks I'm this really good person now. What if I mess up?" His question caught me off guard. Here was a 10-year-old wrestling with the weight of being seen as a moral exemplar. It was too much responsibility for such young shoulders. "Tommy," I said gently, "what you did was brave and kind, but nobody expects you to be perfect. We all make mistakes. That's part of being human." He didn't look convinced. "You know," I continued, "courage isn't about never being afraid or never making mistakes. It's about doing the right thing even when it's hard, even when you're scared. And that's something you can keep choosing, every day, in big ways and small ones." He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. "Like Lucas's dad," he said. "He made a mistake, but then he did the right thing after." "Exactly," I smiled. "That took courage too." As Tommy left the classroom that day, I wondered what the future held for this extraordinary ordinary boy. The scholarship would open doors that might have remained closed to him. His friendship with Lucas had already changed both their lives immeasurably, and the ripple effects of his one brave moment continued to spread outward in ways none of us could fully track or measure. Winter came early that year, bringing with it the excitement of the holiday season. Our class was busy preparing for the annual winter concert when we received news that would once again thrust our little school into the spotlight. The President's Education Advisory Committee had selected Lincoln Elementary to receive a special commendation for our contributions to anti-bullying education. Representatives would be visiting our school in January for a special assembly. Tommy and Lucas were specifically mentioned in the notification. When I told Tommy about the commendation, he had a look of sheer panic on his face. "Will I have to make a speech?" he asked, horrified. "Not if you don't want to," I assured him. Relief flooded his features. Despite all the attention, Tommy remained deeply uncomfortable in the spotlight. The irony wasn't lost on me. The boy who'd so boldly stood up in a moment of injustice was painfully shy in most other contexts. The day of the assembly arrived with great fanfare. The local news was there, along with representatives from the Department of Education. Our small gymnasium was packed with students, teachers, and parents from throughout the district. Tommy sat between his mother and Lucas, looking uncomfortable in the button-up shirt his mother had clearly bought specially for the occasion. It was slightly too big for him, the sleeves extending past his wrists. The committee chairwoman gave a speech about the importance of character education, and how Lincoln Elementary had become a model for schools nationwide. She presented the principal with a plaque and announced that our school would receive a grant to further develop our character education curriculum. When it came time to recognize Tommy and Lucas specifically, they were called to the stage. Lucas went willingly, but Tommy hesitated, looking to me with pleading eyes. I nodded encouragingly, and he slowly made his way forward, shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself smaller. The chairwoman knelt down to their level, speaking to them quietly before turning to address the audience again. These young men remind us that our character is defined not by our most comfortable moments, but by what we do when faced with difficult choices. They exemplify the values we hope to instill in all our nation's children. Applause thundered through the gymnasium. Lucas smiled broadly, but Tommy stared at his shoes, his face flushed crimson. As they left the stage, something unexpected happened. A small girl from the kindergarten class broke away from her teacher and ran up to Tommy. She thrust a handmade card into his hands and quickly hugged him around the waist before running back to her class. Tommy looked down at the card, which featured a crudely drawn stick figure with the words, "My hero," written in wobbly letters. For the first time that day, he smiled. After the assembly, there was a small reception in the library. Tommy quickly retreated to a quiet corner with Lucas, both boys more interested in a new comic book than in talking to the important visitors. I watched as various adults tried to engage them, particularly Tommy, only to receive polite but brief responses. Ms. Reynolds from the Education Foundation was there as well, deep in conversation with Tommy's mother. From the animated way they were talking, it seemed they had developed a genuine friendship over the past months. I was arranging refreshments when I overheard two of the committee members talking quietly. "Remarkable story," one was saying. "Perfect for the national campaign." "Absolutely," the other agreed. "The visuals will be compelling too. The underdog standing up for what's right. It's the American dream narrative." Something about their conversation unsettled me. There was a calculated quality to it that seemed at odds with the authentic courage and kindness that Tommy had displayed. I found myself becoming protective, wanting to shield Tommy from being reduced to a convenient symbol or marketing tool. As the event wound down, I sought out Tommy and found him helping the custodian stack chairs, quietly pitching in without being asked, as was his way. "You did great today," I told him. "How are you feeling?" He shrugged. "Okay, I guess. Can I go back to being regular Tommy now?" The question broke my heart a little. "Of course you can," I said. "You've always been regular Tommy to me. A really special regular Tommy." He gave me a small smile. "Mr. Michael," he said hesitantly, "all these people keep saying I did something really important, but I still don't understand why it was such a big deal. Wouldn't anyone have done the same thing?" And there it was, the crux of why Tommy's story had resonated so deeply with so many. The sad truth was that no, not anyone would have done what he did. Many would have stayed silent, prioritizing comfort over courage, conformity over compassion. Adults and children alike often choose the easier path of looking away from injustice, especially when confronting it comes with social risks. "I wish everyone would," I told him honestly, "but it takes a special kind of bravery to stand up for someone else, especially when you're standing up to an adult. You saw something wrong and you spoke up, even though it was scary. That's what makes it important." Tommy considered this, his brow furrowed in that serious way of his. "Lucas would have done it for me," he said finally, with absolute certainty. "I believe he would," I agreed, touched by his faith in his friend. As the last of the visitors left, and the students were dismissed for the day, I found myself reflecting on Tommy's question. Why had his simple act of standing up for his friend captured so much attention? Perhaps because it represented something increasingly rare, yet desperately needed in our society. Moral courage, untainted by self-interest. Or perhaps because it came from such an unexpected source. A quiet, economically disadvantaged child whom many might have overlooked. Whatever the reason, I knew that the impact of Tommy's actions would continue long after the media attention faded and the educational campaigns ended. It would live on in the changed relationship between Lucas and his father. It would live on in the students who witnessed it firsthand and carried that memory into their own moral choices. And it would live on in me, reminding me that the most profound teaching moments often come not from the curriculum, but from the character of the children themselves. The school year continued, and as spring approached once again, I noticed subtle changes in our classroom community. Students were quicker to defend each other, more willing to include those on the margins. When conflicts arose, I would sometimes hear them ask each other, "What would Tommy do?" Much to Tommy's embarrassment. Lucas's transformation was the most remarkable. His stutter, while still present, no longer defined him in the eyes of his peers. He had joined the science club and was flourishing, his extensive knowledge of astronomy making him something of a celebrity when our school competed in the regional science fair. And through it all, Tommy was quietly by his side, never seeking recognition, always ready with a supportive word or gesture. One afternoon in late April, almost exactly a year after the incident that had changed so much, I kept both boys after school to help with a special project, organizing books for a donation to an underserved school in a neighboring district. As we worked together, I asked them a question that had been on my mind. If you could go back to that day, would you do anything differently? Lucas thought for a moment. I would have tried harder not to be scared, he said, his stutter barely noticeable now. The solar system project was really good. I should have been proud of it. I nodded, touched by his answer. And you, Tommy? Tommy continued sorting books, not looking up. I would have been nicer to Mr. Parker, he said finally. I was kind of rude. I couldn't help but smile at that. Only Tommy would be concerned about his tone when standing up to an adult who was belittling his own child. I think Mr. Parker needed to hear exactly what you said, exactly how you said it, I told him. Sometimes the truth has to be a little uncomfortable to make an impact. Tommy looked up then, his expression earnest. My mom always says that how you say something is as important as what you say. She says you can be honest without being mean. Your mom is very wise, I replied. You're lucky to have her. I know, he said simply. As they finished the task and prepared to leave, I was struck by how ordinary they seemed. Just two 10-year-old boys eager to get home and play. The national attention had faded, as all news stories eventually do. The educational program continued, but without the intense spotlight of the early days. And yet something profound remained, a lesson about courage and kindness that had transformed not only these boys' lives, but the lives of countless others who had heard their story. I watched them walk away together, Tommy and Lucas, the unlikely heroes of Lincoln Elementary. Tommy had never wanted to be a hero. He had simply wanted his friend to not feel alone. Sometimes I realized, that's all heroism really is. As I watched those two boys walk away together that spring afternoon, something caught in my throat. There's a kind of beauty in childhood friendships that we adults often forget. Pure, uncomplicated, built on small moments of loyalty that mean everything. Life moves forward, relentless in its pace. Summer came and went. When the new school year began, I found myself teaching 5th grade instead of 4th, which meant I had Tommy and Lucas in my class once again. They walked in that first day with the easy confidence of returning veterans. Tommy still quiet, but carrying himself with slightly more assurance. Lucas chattering away about the space camp he'd attended over the summer. I noticed something else too. The other children gravitated toward them in a way that had nothing to do with their brief fame. There was something magnetic about their friendship, something the other kids wanted to be near. It wasn't popularity in the traditional sense. Tommy was still too quiet and Lucas too earnest for that, but rather a kind of respect that ran deeper than playground politics. October brought parent-teacher conferences. Lucas's parents arrived together. Mr. Parker, now the picture of an engaged father, asking thoughtful questions about his son's progress. The transformation in their family dynamic was remarkable, though I knew from Lucas that they were still working through issues in family therapy. When Tommy's mother arrived for her conference, she looked different too. The perpetual exhaustion I'd grown used to seeing on her face had eased somewhat. She'd been able to quit her second job, she told me, thanks to a promotion at her main employment and some additional support that had come their way. She didn't elaborate, but I suspected Ms. Reynolds and her foundation had found ways to help beyond the college scholarship. Tommy seems happier this year, I observed. She smiled, a mother's knowing smile. He is. All that attention was hard on him. He's relieved to just be a regular kid again. He never wanted to be anything else, I agreed. That's my Tommy, she said with quiet pride. Always has been content with what he has, even when it wasn't much. As she gathered her things to leave, she hesitated. You know, Mr. Michael, I've been meaning to thank you. For what? For seeing him, she said simply. for noticing my boy when he was trying his hardest not to be noticed. That meant something, even before all this happened. Her words stayed with me long after she left. How many other children were out there, I wondered, quietly hoping that someone would simply see them. Winter brought an unexpected development. The educational program based on Tommy and Lucas's story had been so successful that Ms. Reynolds's foundation wanted to expand it into a full curriculum. They needed consultants who knew the boys personally, and they asked if I would consider taking a leave of absence from teaching to join the project. It was a difficult decision. I loved my classroom and my students, but the opportunity to potentially impact thousands of classrooms across the country was compelling. After much consideration, I agreed to a 1-year position with the foundation, with the principal's blessing and the promise that my teaching position would be waiting when I returned. My last day in the classroom before the temporary departure was bittersweet. The students had prepared cards and small gifts, their way of saying they would miss me. Tommy and Lucas lingered after the others had gone to recess. "Will you be famous now too?" Lucas asked, his eyes wide. I laughed. "Definitely not. I'll be working behind the scenes, helping make sure the program really helps other kids." "That's good," Tommy said quietly. "Being famous isn't that great." I couldn't help but smile at his serious assessment. "We'll write you emails," Lucas promised. "I'll tell you about our science fair project. We're doing black holes this year. I'm counting on it," I told them, "and I'll be back before you know it." As they turned to leave, Tommy paused in the doorway. "Mr. Michael, the new teacher, will they know about, everything that happened?" I understood his concern immediately. He didn't want to be treated differently, to be the hero kid instead of just Tommy. "They'll know," I said gently, "because it's part of this school's history now. But I'll make sure they understand that's not who you are all the time, that you're just Tommy, who likes space books and is good at math and happens to be a very good friend." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer, and hurried to catch up with Lucas. My year with the foundation was eye-opening. I traveled to schools across the country, observing how the program was being implemented and gathering feedback for improvements. Everywhere I went, I carried Tommy and Lucas's story with me, sharing the behind-the-scenes reality that didn't make it into the official materials. The ordinariness of these two boys who had briefly done something extraordinary. I saw firsthand how their story resonated in vastly different communities. In affluent suburban schools and struggling inner-city classrooms alike, children connected with the simple truth at its core, that standing up for someone matters, that friendship can be transformative, that courage often comes in small, quiet moments. What struck me most during that year was how hungry people were for these stories of everyday goodness. In a world that often felt increasingly divided and cynical, Tommy's simple act of friendship had cut through the noise and touched something fundamental in our collective consciousness. I kept in regular contact with Tommy and Lucas through email. True to his word, Lucas sent detailed updates about their science fair project, which ended up taking first place at the regional competition. Tommy's emails were shorter but no less meaningful, often containing small observations about their substitute teacher, or questions about when I would return. Ms. Reynolds proved to be a remarkable boss, passionate about education, attentive to the practical realities of classroom implementation, and unfailingly respectful of Tommy and Lucas's privacy. Under her leadership, the foundation developed additional materials focused on different aspects of character education, though the original story remained at the heart of the program. "What made Tommy's actions so powerful," she remarked to me one day as we reviewed feedback from a pilot school, "was that it came from a place of such authenticity. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He wasn't seeking attention or praise. He just couldn't bear to see his friend hurting." "That's the irony," I agreed. "If he'd been seeking recognition, it probably wouldn't have resonated the way it did." She nodded thoughtfully. "There's a lesson in there for all of us, I think." Spring brought the end of my time with the foundation and preparations for my return to the classroom. Before heading back to Minnesota, I made a trip to Washington, D.C., where the Department of Education was hosting a summit on character education in schools. The program Tommy had inspired was being featured as a case study in effective social-emotional learning. During a panel discussion, an educator from Philadelphia raised her hand. "The program is wonderful," she said, "but I wonder about the pressure it puts on the original children involved. Have we considered the ethics of turning real children's experiences into educational tools, even with the best of intentions? Her question hit close to my own lingering concerns. The moderator turned to me, as the person who knew Tommy and Lucas best. It's something we've been very conscious of, I acknowledged. From the beginning, Tommy's comfort and privacy were priorities. We'd changed names, locations, and specific details in all the materials. Most importantly, we've tried to maintain the message that what made Tommy's actions special wasn't that he was somehow extraordinary, but that he was a regular kid who chose courage in a difficult moment, something any child could potentially do. The woman nodded but didn't look entirely convinced. And how are the real children doing now? Has the attention affected them? I thought about Tommy's recent emails, his excitement about moving up to middle school next year, his continued friendship with Lucas. They're doing well, I said. They've been allowed to step back from the spotlight and just be kids again. I think that's been vital to their well-being. What I didn't say, what I couldn't fully articulate in that professional setting, was how profoundly the whole experience had changed me as an educator, how it had sharpened my awareness of the quiet children, the ones who don't demand attention but who often see and feel things deeply, how it had reminded me that character education isn't just a curriculum component, but something lived and breathed in the small daily interactions of classroom life. I returned to Lincoln Elementary in late April, just in time for the final weeks of the school year. The children welcomed me back with enthusiasm, bombarding me with stories of what I'd missed. Tommy and Lucas hung back, smiling but more reserved, until the initial excitement had died down. "Did you see the White House?" Lucas asked when he finally approached my desk. "I did, from the outside at least," I told him. "And I thought of you when I visited the Air and Space Museum." His face lit up. "Did they have the Mars rover model? I saw it online." As Lucas launched into questions about the museum exhibits, Tommy stood quietly beside him, observing as he so often did. When Lucas paused for breath, Tommy spoke up. "We're glad you're back, Mr. Michael," he said simply. Those 6 words, delivered in his earnest way, meant more to me than any professional recognition I'd received during my year away. The last day of elementary school for Tommy and Lucas was bittersweet. They were moving on to middle school next year, a new chapter beginning. As the final bell rang and students streamed out into the sunshine of early summer, I found myself feeling oddly emotional. These 2 boys had changed the trajectory of my career and, in many ways, my understanding of education itself. I was cleaning up my classroom when I heard a knock on the door. Tommy stood there, looking somewhat awkward. "Forgot my science book," he explained, pointing to a shelf where indeed a textbook sat. As he retrieved it, he lingered, seemingly wanting to say something more. "Everything okay, Tommy?" I prompted. He nodded, then shook his head, then shrugged, a perfect encapsulation of preteen emotional complexity. He began, then stopped. "Middle school is going to be different, right?" "It will," I agreed. "Bigger, more teachers, more kids." "Lucas is worried," he confided, "about his stutter coming back when he's nervous around new people." I understood now. He wasn't concerned for himself, but for his friend. Some things never changed. "The stutter might get worse sometimes when he's anxious," I acknowledged. "But Lucas is a lot stronger now than he was 2 years ago. And he has you." Tommy nodded soberly, taking this responsibility seriously. "And Tommy, it's okay if you need support sometimes too. Friendship works both ways." He seemed to consider this concept carefully, as if it hadn't fully occurred to him before. "Yeah," he said finally. "I guess it does." With that, he gave me a quick, awkward wave and was gone, off to middle school, adolescence, and whatever life had in store for him next. I didn't see much of Tommy or Lucas over the next few years, just occasional glimpses around town or updates from other teachers. They remained close friends through middle school, I heard, though their interests began to diverge somewhat. Lucas leaning heavily into science and technology, Tommy discovering a passion for creative writing that surprised those who knew him only as the quiet kid. The program their story had inspired continued to evolve and expand. By the time they reached high school, it had been implemented in over 5,000 schools nationwide and was being adapted for international education systems. I remained peripherally involved, consulting occasionally on updates and new materials. It was during their junior year of high school that I received an unexpected email from Tommy. Now 16, he had a request that both surprised and moved me. The newspaper wants to do a "where are they now" kind of story about me and Lucas, he wrote. I've always said no before, but I'm thinking maybe it's okay this time. They want to talk to other people who were there too. Would you be willing to be interviewed? I wrote back immediately. Of course, but may I ask what changed your mind after all these years? His response came that evening. I visited one of the elementary schools using the program last week. Ms. Reynolds arranged it. I didn't talk about being the kid from the story or anything. I was just helping with their peer mentorship program. But seeing those little kids learning about standing up for each other, it made me think maybe the story still matters. Not because of me, but because of what it teaches. I sat back in my chair, marveling at the wisdom in his words. The boy who had once been so uncomfortable with attention had grown into a young man who could see beyond his personal discomfort to the greater impact of his experience. The interview took place at the high school, with the journalist speaking to Tommy, Lucas, and several others involved in the original events. I was struck by how poised both young men had become. Lucas, his stutter now barely perceptible, spoke eloquently about the impact of having a friend who believed in him unequivocally. Tommy, still more reserved but clearly more comfortable in his skin, reflected thoughtfully on the strange experience of having a childhood moment define so much of his life. The weird thing is, he told the journalist, I still don't think what I did was that special. I just couldn't stand seeing someone hurt my friend. Anyone would do that for someone they care about. The reporter smiled. But that's precisely why your story has had such staying power, Tommy. Because you remind us that extraordinary moments often come from very ordinary people following their conscience. I guess, Tommy conceded, though he still looked somewhat unconvinced. After the interviews, I had a chance to speak with both young men privately. Lucas was heading to MIT in the fall. His outstanding scientific abilities combined with the publicity of his story had opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed to a student from our modest school district. He was planning to study astrophysics, his childhood fascination with space having evolved into serious academic interest. Tommy's plans were less defined. Thanks to the scholarship established for him years earlier, college was financially possible, but he seemed ambivalent about his path. I'm thinking about taking a gap year, he confided, maybe working with Ms. Reynolds' foundation on their peer mentorship programs. That sounds perfect for you, I told him sincerely. He nodded, looking thoughtful. The thing is, Mr. Michael, I've spent so much of my life being that kid from the bullying story. I think I need some time to figure out who else I am, you know? I did know. In fact, I'd been concerned about exactly this issue from the beginning. How a single moment of childhood courage might come to overshadow everything else about him. Whoever else you turn out to be, I told him. I have a feeling it's going to be someone pretty remarkable. He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. Thanks for seeing me, he said, unknowingly echoing his mother's words from years before. Not just the story, but me. The newspaper article was published the following Sunday. It was thoughtful and nuanced, focusing not just on the original incident, but on the lasting impact it had on everyone involved, from Lucas and his family to the educational program that had reached millions of children. What the article couldn't capture, though, was what I knew as their former teacher, how Tommy's quiet act of courage had rippled outward in ways that couldn't be quantified. How many children had learned to stand up for themselves or others because of his example? How many friendships had formed because one child reached out to another who was struggling? These were impacts that would never make headlines, but were no less real for their invisibility. Tommy graduated high school the following spring, and did indeed take his gap year, working with the foundation on peer mentorship programs in underserved schools. Lucas headed to MIT, where he thrived academically, while remaining grounded thanks to his early experiences with both struggle and support. As for me, I continued teaching, carrying the lessons from Tommy and Lucas into each new classroom. I became more attuned to the quiet students, the ones who observe more than they speak. I developed a keener eye for the subtle dynamics of friendship and exclusion that shape children's experiences, and I never forgot that the most profound moments of teaching often come not from the curriculum, but from the character of the children themselves. 3 years after their graduation, I received a thick envelope in the mail. Inside was a copy of a book titled Seen, The Power of Being Noticed. The author's name on the cover, Thomas Jenkins. Tommy, now Tom, had written a book combining memoir with insights about childhood, belonging, and the impact of being truly seen by others. In it, he reflected on his experiences with a wisdom and perspective that moved me deeply. He wrote about Lucas, about his mother, about Mr. Parker's transformation, and yes, about me, describing how a teacher's simple act of noticing a quiet child had set the stage for everything that followed. The inscription he'd written inside the cover brought tears to my eyes. To Mr. Michael, who taught me that seeing someone is the first act of courage. Thank you for seeing me when I was trying so hard to be invisible. The book became a bestseller, leading to speaking engagements and a TED Talk that was viewed millions of times online. Tom Jenkins, once the boy who shrank from attention, now used his platform to advocate for educational approaches that valued emotional intelligence alongside academic achievement. Lucas, meanwhile, was making his own mark in the world of astrophysics research, part of a team developing new technologies for deep space exploration. The friends remained close despite the distance between them, their bond having weathered the transitions of adolescence and early adulthood. 10 years after that fateful day in our classroom, I attended a conference where Tom was the keynote speaker. The shy boy had grown into a compelling man, whose quiet thoughtfulness translated into a powerful speaking presence. He didn't rely on charisma or flash, but rather on authenticity and insight, qualities that had been present in him even as a child. After his talk, we met for coffee, catching up on the years between. He told me about his recent engagement, his continuing work with the foundation, and his plans for a second book. I shared stories of my current students, including one who reminded me somewhat of him, quiet, observant, with a strong sense of justice. "You know," Tom said as our conversation drew to a close, "I've been thinking lately about what might have happened if I hadn't spoken up that day." "Oh?" I prompted. "Lucas and I might never have become friends. His dad might never have confronted his own behavior. I might have stayed invisible. So many things would be different." I nodded, having had similar thoughts over the years. "But the thing is," he continued, "it wasn't really a choice. Not in the moment. I just couldn't stand seeing him hurt like that. It wasn't brave or special. It was just necessary. The best kind of courage often feels that way," I observed. "Like there isn't really a choice at all." Tom smiled, recognizing the truth in this. "I've tried to explain that in interviews, but people want it to be more dramatic. They want me to have consciously decided to be heroic. The truth is better," I told him. "More useful to other kids. It's about doing what feels right in the moment, even when it's scary." As we parted ways that day, I couldn't help reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had begun with one ordinary moment of childhood courage. How a quiet boy's decision to speak up for his friend had not only changed individual lives, but had rippled outward to impact thousands of others. How the simple act of truly seeing another person could set in motion transformations that none of us could have imagined. I still teach 4th grade at Lincoln Elementary. The faces change each year, but the fundamental dynamics of childhood remain. There are still quiet children who observe more than they speak, still moments of unkindness that call for intervention, still friendships that form across differences and transform both parties. And every year I tell my students a story, not about famous historical figures or fictional characters, but about 2 ordinary boys named Tommy and Lucas who taught their teacher what real courage looks like. I tell them how a single moment of standing up for someone can change lives in ways we can't predict. I tell them that they too have that power, to see others, to speak up, to be the friend someone needs. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that remind us not of extraordinary heroes, but of our own capacity for everyday courage. Tommy Jenkins never wanted to be a hero. He just wanted his friend to not feel alone. And in the end, isn't that what we all need? Someone who sees us clearly, stands beside us when things get hard, and reminds us that we're never truly alone. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and comment below about which part moved you the most. And before you go, there's a recommended video here that will give you goosebumps. Watch it now. What moment in this story impacted you the most? Have you ever stood up for someone when others wouldn't?